Hello and welcome. My name is Francisco, and in this video we are going to learn about attributes. Attributes are an important part of HTML because they change the behavior of your element. A common example of this can be changing the color of your text element. Attributes are a piece of code that contain extra information about an element. The formula to create an attribute consists of the name and the value properties. You start with the name of the attribute you are using, then an equal sign, and in quotation marks, whatever value you are going to be using. We see here the class attribute. The purpose of the class attribute is to link a CSS rule to your HTML element. To create the class attribute, you need a name. Here we have class. Then we have the value. Your value will be whatever CSS rule you are linking to your HTML element. Here we have the ID attribute. This attribute is used to add an identifying name to an element. To create the ID attribute, you need the name. Here, it's ID, then whatever value you will be using. For the ID attribute, your value will be whatever identifying name you chose. Now that we have a better understanding of what an attribute is and how to create one, we can learn how to add one to an HTML element. Here we have a paragraph element. Attributes are added to the opening tag of the element. More specifically, you place the attributes right before the right angle bracket of the opening tag. It is in this space that you place your attribute formula. Let's add a class attribute to this paragraph element. We take our opening tag and right before the right angle bracket, we place our class attribute. You have the ability to add more than one attribute to any element. To do this, you simply separate them with a space. For example, we can take this paragraph element. First, we add the class attribute, and separated by a space, we can add our ID attribute. Now, this example only applies if the values are from different attributes. For example, here we have a class attribute and an ID attribute. If you want to add two different values to the same attribute, well, you place them within the same quotation marks, but you separate them with a space. In the following example, I've created a very basic HTML document. First, we have a heading, which displays HTML attributes. Then we have two paragraph elements, which display definitions for an HTML attribute. Below, you will see some CSS. It is not important that you learn CSS. Rather, I'm just giving you this as an example so that you can see how you can use an attribute to change the behavior of your element. In this case, we are going to be changing the text color to red. I'd like to add an identifying name to my heading, and I know that the ID attribute is used to do just that. I will begin with the opening tag of the element, and I will make a space right before the right angle bracket. This is where I will be placing my attribute. So let's begin with the name, ID, then equals, and in quotation marks, whatever identifying name I'd like to give this element. To keep things simple, I will give this an identifying name of main-heading. Earlier, we learned that the class attribute is used to link CSS rules to your HTML document. CSS is used to change the styles of your document so you can create the rule and then use the class attribute to bring that rule into your HTML. As noted earlier, I created a CSS rule and I named it text-red. We see here that this CSS rule changes the behavior by changing its color to red. This means that we can use the class attribute with the value of text-red to change the color of the text in that element to red. Let's practice doing just that to our first paragraph. We begin with the opening tag, and right before the right angle bracket, we create a space, and in this space, we add our attribute. Our formula states we begin with a name, so it's class, then equals, and in quotation marks, the value. Again, our value here is text red, so I just type text-red. Now, please note, I am not adding the dot. I am only adding the name of that class rule. And now we can look at our example and we see that our text has turned red. What we did here is we used a class attribute to link an element to a CSS rule. You can also add more than one value to the same attribute. So let's create a quick CSS rule that makes text larger and add it to our first paragraph. I just want to remind you that you don't need to know CSS yet. I'm just doing this in front of you so that you have a better idea of how the class attribute works. So quickly, let's create a CSS rule. Dot bigger dash text. So this name can be whatever name the developer, in this case me, wants to use. And I am simply going to say font size, let's say here, 32 pixel. Now this is very large. We now go back to our first paragraph element, and inside the same quotation marks, I add a space right after our first value. And here I can add our second value, which is bigger dash text, and you will see here that our text just got bigger. So again, here we used a class attribute to link a CSS rule into that element. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button, as it really helps me out. And I'll see you next time.